Yeah. You know what? I think when you own a business a lot of times as well, sometimes it's fun to have that complete time off, but other times you just want to pull off the throttle a little bit, but just do like one or two key important tasks for the day that keeps the momentum going. It keeps your head in the game, but you also develop the ability to disconnect and still be happy with that process.
Yeah, completely. I think that's for everything. I talk a lot about finding the maximum recoverable volume that you can do, and then also finding the minimum effective dose in all
Yeah.
areas, not just with business or training, but in relationships as well. Because I know that I can have that conversation with my wife and say, this is going to be a season of like maximum recoverable volume for business or for my fitness pursuit or whatever it may be, which means that our relationship may kind of have to live in this minimum effective dose place where we're still doing those like maybe Saturday night date nights. Maybe we're not doing like the big long trips that we're planning. And maybe there's, we're pulling back in some areas so that other areas of life you can push the gas pedal a little bit more. So I think that kind of balancing act always needs to happen.
I think that's a really key principle that a lot of people learn directly through fitness and their approach. If you try to white knuckle everything all the time, eventually you get to a point where you get more effective at what you're doing, but the output that you're putting in requires so much more recovery. And a lot of people run themselves into the ground and run into those issues. But when you start to learn how to manage those capacities with your body, you can learn how to transfer them directly to how you apply it to business, to life, to different seasons of the year. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that you can learn, not just that particular skill, but being able to take the lessons that you're picking up and that you're learning directly from one area of life, say fitness, and be able to apply them elsewhere to your relationships or to building wealth.
Yeah, completely. And I think that was a tough lesson for me on the fitness side of things. And now I look back at it, like if I can go through a dieting phase, for example, I usually do like one a year. So when I go through my dieting phase, I want to get it over with quickly and efficiently. But I also realize that if I can diet effectively while getting to the gym 3 days a week versus 6 days a week, is there really any added benefit of those 3 extra days in the gym other than maybe, you love to be there in it? But for me at this point in my life, I'm not like thrilled to go to the gym 6 days a week. So the 3 extra recovery days or the extra hour plus that I get to spend working on my business or relationship, family time, whatever it may be, is worth it because I know 3 days is going to get the job done. Why am I it's a lot of times the mindset of I'm leaving results on the table. And sometimes it's just disconnecting from that as a hard fact. Just because you thought it doesn't mean it's true, and recognizing that a lot can be accomplished with that minimum effective dose. And it doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're missing out on progress that could have been made. It means you're just working smarter and not harder.
No doubt. And do you ever deal with clients who have maybe been in elite level shape before? Maybe they were a competitor and they want to get they want to get results, but they want to find a more sustainable path. But as soon as they start to focus on, say, their health or on their training, nutrition, whatever it is, a little bit more, they tend to backslide into like this all intensive component and approach, even while maybe they're more stressed from their personal life. Their work is busier. Is that something that you deal with?
Yeah, frequently. And it doesn't even have to be, we actually do work with a lot of former competitors who are transitioning out of that identity, which can be a difficult transition to make, whether they competed at a high level, bodybuilding, bikini, CrossFit athletes, things like that, but also just women who, and we work primarily with women, but also women who played a sport in college, or they're comparing themselves to like the 20-year-old version of themselves. They're like, well, when I was 20, I could do this, this, and this. It's like, well, let's talk about all the variables in your life now that you're 40 plus that, were very different when you were 20. Like now you have a family, now you have this career, now you have, all of these other responsibilities. So is it reasonable to think that the stress-free 20-year-old version of you is going to, respond the same way as the stressed out 40-year-old version? And just sometimes it's like breaking those false beliefs, the narratives that kind of go along with it. It's like, let's peel back the layers and see what you're actually, what narrative you're communicating to yourself. And if there's any validity to it, if there's any truth to it, or is it more, you're holding on to something that used to be, but it no longer is. And then let's rewrite the narrative that actually makes more sense for this phase and season of your life.
Yeah, that's such a crucial component, especially when you have somebody who's been a high performer. They've held themselves to a high standard. Using the athlete example, many times people who are athletes, when they were athletes, they had all of their training designed directly for them. They had the teamwork and support of potentially multiple coaches, of teammates. And at that phase, it might have been go to school, play your sport, go to school, play your sport. And now everything else has changed, not to mention underlying physiology has changed, and people hold themselves to that same standard, and then they no longer have that same support. And so when people get stuck in that identity of who I was at this phase and don't adapt a different operating system, that's what leads, I believe, a lot of people to some of a toxic relationship with health and with fitness. And for you, with Mind Over Macros, is that a big piece of the puzzle that you find? It's like, how do you conquer the mindset, getting out of just the analytics, out of the numbers, and really start to understand the mindset component?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I'm very data driven. I love research. I love looking at, the latest and greatest, and, show me new studies on everything, physiology and, metabolism, hormones, all the stuff. I want to learn all of it. And I found myself very early on in my career really gravitating towards that like science-based approach. If it says it in a study, then that's what I'm going to use for my clients. And so I started as a personal trainer and then got more into the nutrition side of things. And what I quickly recognized was that the more that I leaned into just what the research says, the more that I lost people. And I wasn't seeing the results that I wanted for my clients. My clients were frustrated. I started working for another company as a nutrition coach, and I got to see thousands and thousands of data points, which was a really cool thing to see. So it was just being able to look at, I think they had tens of thousands of members in their nutrition coaching program. And we could kind of look through and sift through all the data and see, weight trends and compliance and all this stuff. And a lot of them were struggling, even though this was all like energy balance. It's just macronutrients, calories in, calories out. We're going to put you in a deficit and you're going to lose weight. And it just wasn't holding up. Like, I don't understand, this is what research tells us. I started doing something really crazy, which was actually having conversations with people as a human and listening. And it always came down to, it wasn't about the nutrition. It wasn't about their workouts. It wasn't about anything other than the things that were going on inside of their mind. It was mindset first. And that was really an eye-opening experience because, again, being able to look at so many data points and recognizing that all of these people who are supposedly following a very, structured, organized macro plan, energy deficit, all the things that you would think would produce results, they weren't seeing results, mainly because there was a disconnect. We weren't focusing on the psychology of the individual. And that was where I started to blend the two. And I've always had a passion for psychology. So it was like, okay, if I can take what I know about, exercise science and physiology and nutritional science, and I can combine that with human psychology and behavior change and how we're wired and the thoughts and beliefs that we have about ourselves and why we self-sabotage and emotional eating and all of these things that come into play. Well, now, to me, that's what makes it sustainable. If I can, I call it like the top-down approach. If I can start with what's going on in between your ears, then I know that everything that happens in your body, we can actually make it stick. But if we miss that piece of, your mindset and your thoughts and beliefs, and mindset is kind of a buzzword right now, but it's important. It is like the underpinning of everything that we do now for our clients to make sure that the results actually last. So I saw a huge shift in not only getting results, but helping clients actually maintain them.
Yeah, that's such a powerful piece. We have to meet people at the individual level, not necessarily put them into a box. One issue that I see consistently across the board, frankly, the fitness industry is getting better at marketing. That's a good thing and a bad thing. But a lot of times in marketing, it's involved the processes around creating a brand, creating an idea, creating a particular structure that makes you different and standing out. And where I think a lot of people get stuck is they might get good at the marketing component, but they try to fit people in this box when that box doesn't serve the individual who's directly in front of you. And that's why coaching itself is such a blend of both an art and a science. And similar to you, there have been so many times, I look at research, I read all this stuff, I see what's going on. What happens in a room full of 12 college-age males doesn't always apply to people out in the real world. It doesn't apply to 45-year-old Susie, who's been doing different yo-yo diets on and off, the grapefruit diet, whatever the hell, for years and trying different classes and seems like she should be in a calorie deficit based on the number of calories that she's working, yet the numbers don't line up. And when she goes online and checks out a nutrition calculator that says she should be eating 1,900 calories, and she's realistically been eating 1,100 for a long period of time, maybe with a few times where it goes way above, it just creates such a disconnect between the end user, the consumer, the average everyday person who is looking to get healthier, what they should really believe. For you, if you have somebody who comes in and they say, hey, Mike, you know what? I feel like I've been doing everything right. I've been eating at a calorie deficit. This is what my food looks like and it's really good. And I feel like nothing works for me. Am I just a non-responder? Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah. So a lot of it would come down to asking more questions. And really getting into some of those things that they've tried. I've been doing everything right. What we need to tease out is, what is your definition of right? And why do you assume that those things are right? Because if it was right for you, then you would be making progress and you would actually be enjoying the process. So oftentimes, and I get this probably more than any other question, I've been doing everything right. Nothing works for me. What do I do from here? And usually I start with, okay, tell me your definition of doing everything right. A lot of times there's all of these assumptions. I've been really meticulous with my, low carb meal plan. I've been doing my 60 minutes of cardio every day. I've been whatever it's, I've been taking my supplements. I've been doing all these things. And when we start to ask those questions, like, why do you think that low carb is right? Well, I follow this guy on Instagram and he told me that, if I want to improve my blood sugar, I have to eat low. It's like, okay, so how does that feel? Is it sustainable? Are you enjoying it? What is your energy like? Do you feel like this adds to your life? Does it take away from your life? And like, once we start, again, peel back the layers, a lot of times the assumption of what's right is not based on anything other than, I believe this to be true because somebody that I follow on Instagram or some article that I read on the internet, I heard it somewhere. My friend did this diet and lost 30 pounds. There's somewhere along the way that this became their version of what's right. And then it's a matter of like, why don't we just find what's right for you? Because a lot of the things that you're communicating don't really fit your lifestyle. You enjoy carbs, you feel better when you're eating carbs. Like,
yeah.
And I'm just using that as one example, but it's a common one. I'm doing everything right. I'm trying to restrict my carb. I'm trying to eat 1,200 calories. Well, why do you think you need to eat 1,200 calories? Well, I opened up MyFitnessPal and that was the target that it gave me. Well, do you think that MyFitnessPal knows you as an individual, or do you think that it's a very generic calculation that it's giving, everybody? If like I need to write a diet for 10,000 people, I should probably accommodate for the slowest metabolism in the room so that everybody loses weight. So there's, once you start to peel back the layers, you start to get to the root of, why do you think this is right? And let's redefine what's right for you and then make it happen. So I've yet to see a true non-responder. Sometimes it's arguing semantics. Like I had this conversation with somebody on a post that I made about metabolism, basically saying like for somebody who's trying to eat 1,100 calories a day, and we shift the focus on like, let's support your metabolism without like, stop stressing it out, stop depriving it. Let's support your metabolism, eat more, and you can actually get leaner. And he pushed back and he's like, there's nowhere in the research that says that you can actually improve somebody's metabolic rate by eating more. And we started getting into the semantics of it. But if the individual is able to stay more consistent, let's just say they think they're eating 1,100 calories, but they're really, trying to eat 1,100 and actually eating a lot more because of binge episodes and snacking or whatever. But then we take this approach of like, we're going to focus on supporting your body and internal health and your metabolism. That's actually going to involve eating more. And we get their calories up to a reasonable amount where they are able to stay consistent. Now, the semantics of it is they weren't in a deficit. Now they are. So they're responding. But from the mindset of the person, of the individual, they're thinking like, I'm taking care of my body now. And that means fueling adequately enough for recovery and like things matter the way that it's perceived, rather than being like, well, you were lying to yourself before and now you're actually in a deficit. I think sometimes feeling like that place of empowerment. I'm doing this for my internal health, for my metabolism, to fuel my activity, to fuel recovery. I'm trying to build muscle. I like that perspective, even if semantics, they didn't actually increase their metabolic rate or do any magic to their metabolism. I still think that frame is a really powerful one for people to hold on to.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly powerful way to approach it. I had a conversation with my personal coach, Blake West, and he says something along the lines of, you can't improve using the same method that caused damage before, right? Something along those lines. And essentially, if you've been following a low carbohydrate, low calorie diet for a prolonged period of time, potentially you're dealing with some metabolic adaptation issues, but potentially you could have dysregulated thyroid. You could have supremely elevated cortisol. There could be all kinds of stuff going on here where continuing to hammer that same thing and trying to take the calories lower and lower and lower simply isn't serving you because your body's not healthy. Your body's focused primarily on homeostasis, on keeping you alive before it is worried about you losing body fat. And I think a lot of people sacrifice health by trying to take calories lower and lower and lower. And once you've played that card, you don't really have anywhere to go because every other physiological system inside your body goes down. Like your digestion suffers. You don't have the vitamins and minerals really needed to look, feel, and perform your best. And so many people get stuck. Just have to keep my calories lower. That's what it's going to be. And it just tends to get people really disenchanted with other options, particularly if they're a data-driven analytical person where they just look at it from a mathematic perspective of, no, like I should be in a deficit. How can eating more help me lose fat? And sometimes we have to take an indirect route to improve the underlying health of the system in order to play that card.
Completely. And I think it's one of those, like you said, if the diet caused the problem, the diet's probably not going to fix the problem. So, and it's like we have to have these toggles, because if you're only playing one hand, if you're only playing the eat less, move more hand, and that hand stops working, you're all out of options. Like that's a losing hand at that point. So where else do you go from there? And so a lot of times it's, if I get pushed back to, again, I said we work primarily with women. Sometimes there's a fear when it's, we're going to get your calories up. We're going to increase the amount that you're eating. And then as much as we can kind of, share that this is for internal health and this is to help you manage stress and perform better. You're going to have so much more energy. You're going to sleep better, all these amazing benefits. But there's still this fear of like, won't I gain weight? Like, won't the scale go up? It's like, well, hopefully not. Maybe a little bit, but hopefully not. But what's the other option? Well, at this point, if you've been doing this, very restrictive, low carb, low calorie diet, where would you like to go? Because it hasn't been sustainable. You're miserable. You're saying there's fatigue, there's brain fog, there's moodiness, there's lack of sleep. Do you want to go less? Because there's really only one other direction. And so I think sometimes it's really just playing that out. Like, here are the two paths. Which one sounds better to you, and then letting them make that decision.
Yeah. And I think letting other people make that decision specifically with their health is so important. Yeah, we can guide them and kind of present the evidence and what the consequences or benefits could be of a certain thing. But ultimately, people want to do things their way. Like, that is a huge component, right? And so I think that's such an important concept to understand when it comes to communicating directly with a client, so they really understand that process and feel like they're at the driver's seat. Because when people are at the driver's seat and taking control of their own health, that's how they become self-sufficient. And ultimately, that's the goal. That's the goal as a coach, not to keep somebody on, recurring revenue forever. It's like, can we teach people how to take these skills? Can we do a knowledge transfer from my brain to yours, and you can apply it directly to your life in a way that's going to be most applicable for you? One area that I see quite a bit, and this will happen for cycles forever and ever through the fitness industry, but low carbohydrate diets, they can be a useful tool, but I see more struggling mentally with people who do well in a low carb diet. And then as soon as they start to incorporate carbohydrates back in, they get scared of that initial weight gain that pops up, even though it generally levels out after like 10 days. They feel like that's the card they have to play. What do you find to be maybe some of the dangers or downsides of prolonged low carb dieting?
Yeah. So especially in the demographic that I work with, I think it's one of those, I usually don't make generic blanket statements. I love to explain nuance and context and say, well, it depends, and here's what it depends on. But for the demographic that I work with, primarily women in their 40s and older, it is causing more harm than it is doing good. And even if you're able to get some temporary weight loss by going low carb, during that time period when you are more sensitive to stress, when hormones are fluctuating, and again, it's going through a certain season or phase, perfectly normal part of life, we do need a tool in the toolbox that is going to be able to help us with stress management and recovery. So when you go low carb, you're basically losing a tool that helps to shut off cortisol. So, carbs raise insulin. Insulin is the shut off valve to cortisol. Being able to increase serotonin, carbs help to boost your mood balancing hormone or neurotransmitter, serotonin. Performance, a lot of times, I'm working with women who lift heavy and they want to get stronger. Well, that's like, if we're not incorporating, some carbohydrates for performance and for recovery. We're leaving results on the table. And then just for straight up energy to get through your day. Again, having a demanding job and a family life and all the things that you're doing, it requires energy. Your brain requires energy. So when you start to notice that fatigue, brain fog, I can't really come up with the words that I used to, I'm struggling to form sentences. There's a reason for that, because you're depriving your body of a primary fuel source that it enjoys. And I think there's this big misconception. A lot of times when we talk about low carbs, we talk about carbohydrate in general, oftentimes you'll hear people immediately go to like bread, pasta, cookies, cake. We forget about, vegetables and fruit and potatoes and rice and oats. When you start to bring that into the lens, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot. I forgot that those are all carbohydrates. And then when you look at like the sweets and everything, typically foods like that, cookies, ice cream, cake, all that stuff that are labeled carbs typically have just as many, if not more, calories from fat than from carbs. There's a lot of misinformation out there about low carb dieting. Like you mentioned, it is a tool in the toolbox. Typically, it's something that I'll use when we have an individual who is more resilient to stress and has the ability. Maybe they're not doing as much heavy lifting. It's just kind of more of a lifestyle client who wants to be healthy, walk a little bit more, but it's not trying to build a bunch of muscle or work out, intensely in the gym or anything like that. It is a tool that we have in the toolbox, but I think especially for my demographic, it's a hard pass.
Hard pass. I like it. It's such a great way to phrase it. Like, again, it's a tool in the toolbox. It doesn't mean it's something you can't, but if you have all these additional external stressors, and then you remove a primary macronutrient that's going to be, one, a great source of fuel for your brain, it's going to help, optimize the conversion of, frankly, T3 to T4 and thyroid function. It's going to help reduce cortisol directly after a workout, or if you're in a highly stressed environment. Removing that can drive stress up, negatively impact sleep. And pretty soon, when you've elevated stress and decreased sleep quality, every other hormonal system inside your body, not to mention your willpower, your ability to make good decisions, is going to go down the drain. It's a tool that you can use, but you have to be aware of the consequences of it, and even have a structured play to gradually bring the carbohydrates back in. I think that's such an important piece of understanding that diets don't have to be linear across the board. Like, if you take a measure that's going to be more intense, well, you have to have an exit strategy for it. And if there's no exit strategy, that's when people start to follow these crazy, basically like photo shoot prep diets, because they're like, hey, X, Y, and Z got ripped for a photo shoot for this. And then they try to apply it forever, not understanding, contextually speaking, that individual might have been at 40, 50% carbohydrates for 9 months. They flipped the switch off for 6 weeks, and then they're going to gradually build back up on the backside.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's very similar to what I said before about the workout structure. If I can get the job done with 3 days a week, why am I going to the gym 6 days a week? It's the same thing if you're trying to improve body composition. If I can get the job done with a balanced macro profile, including carbohydrate, why am I going to suffer through a low carb diet if I don't have to? The same thing with a client. A lot of it is, talking about preference. So there's the lifestyle variable, there's the physiological, and then there's also personal preference. And I think that is one of the things that gets overlooked so much. It's like, do you enjoy these foods? Yes. Well, why are we restricting them? Because all that's going to do is create the desire to overconsume them later. Let's just incorporate these, in what makes sense for you, where you don't feel deprived, you don't feel restricted. And that's going to depend on the individual. But it's one of those things that if you don't have to go that path, then to me, it's more enjoyable to keep more of a balanced macro profile. And there's going to be obviously some variance based off of each person. But I've seen more success with, more of that balanced, kind of starting at that like 40, 30, 30 range and then kind of titrating up and down from there.
Yeah. You made me think of a conversation I had actually not too long ago with a client, and she was being hard on herself because she's like, I haven't been perfect on my macros. I haven't been perfect on this particular approach or this phase that we're in. And as of the recording of this, we're like 2 days out from Christmas. So it is prime time for cookies, sweets, parties, alcohol, all that stuff, right? And I was talking with her and I'm like, I don't know a single person who's prepped for a show, prepped for a photo shoot, and she's not looking to do any of these things, by the way, who's been perfect on their diet all the way through. I know I never have, right? And also, for what you're doing this for, you're doing it for more confidence, to be happier in your skin, to be able to enjoy some of these moments and these other areas that you connect with in your life, like going out to dinner with your husband, right? And enjoying these moments while you can still do so without potentially gaining the weight that had been an issue previously. What if success for you wasn't 100% perfection on hitting these numbers and eating these foods? What if success was being 85%, where you have that date night, you have these components? Because if we compare ourselves against this, 0 to 100 type philosophy and apply a standard that might be designed for somebody who's legitimately a professional athlete, a physique competitor, whose entire life is around getting shredded, having strided butt cheeks for 7 minutes while they step on stage, that doesn't match what we desire. And it doesn't match the other things that we enjoy. And so if we do not factor that mindset component in, what are we doing?
Yeah, and typically the mindset of 100%, I have to be 100% perfect. It's the aftermath of that. It's when you can't, because it's an impossible standard. Think about any area of your life where you're expected to be 100% perfect 100% of the time. It is an impossible standard. And so what happens when you fall short of that? And now there's the perception of failure, and the bar and the standard is set so high that it feels like this huge mountain to quote unquote get back on track. Because get back on track means do every single thing right and be even more diligent than you were trying to be. It's mentally exhausting, which typically leads people to go hard in the other direction. So the pendulum swings. It's, kind of like the further you pull the rubber band back, the harder it snaps. And that's usually what happens with that mindset versus, we're going to be, like you mentioned, 85%. We're going to reframe the definition of success. And then when you do fall off, it's a gradual movement. It's not like this, we have to go all the way back on track. It's just a gradual movement back into the lane that you were in.
Yeah. It's like, listen, if you weren't perfect and maybe you had something that you shouldn't have based on what your goals are, one, is it really something you should have had? Like, that's a conversation to have. But second, just get back and make the next best decision, because things aren't always going to be perfect. It's like if you're going out to eat and you used to always get like a double cheeseburger with bacon and fries, which sounds really delicious right about now, and you drink 3 beers. Well, like, what if you just had a side salad instead of the fries? That's an improvement. What if we cut down from 3 beers to 1 beer? Those are all improvements. You still get to enjoy some of those concepts or some of those foods, some of these experiences. However, we're just making them a little bit better. And so if we can keep the enjoyment of something that is fulfilling in life in many different ways, yet make slight improvements on that lead us towards a healthier lifestyle that we're looking to have, isn't that success? Isn't that what we want?
Yeah, I would argue that that's exactly where success lives. It's those tiny adjustments that aren't super exciting to talk about. And it's not the 30 pounds in 6-week fat loss challenge, but that's where real success happens. It's those little trade-offs. It's the little sacrifices. It's the small additions where you're adding that extra serving of veggies on your plate instead of whatever else you might have put on there before. Those little tiny additions or subtractions that go a long way, that feel almost inconsequential, but they compound over time. Those little changes that you probably don't notice until months go by, and then you're a totally different person. Your foundational habits have changed. The way that you identify has changed. The future version of yourself that you think is possible, now all of a sudden that person is well within reach. And that's the compounding effect of exactly what you're talking about, where we're defining success in something that's actually more real life applicable.
Yeah, it gets me thinking of 75 hard, which, listen, if anybody wants to do something like 75 hard, a challenge where you're doing multiple workouts per day for 75 days and you get results on it, hat tip to you. However, I've seen so many people that do things like that and then they completely backslide. Then they're like, well, I guess I'll try to do 75 hard again. Like, what if we just didn't fucking do 75 hard? What if we did? Cool. 52 weeks a year, we did 3 workouts a week and we went for a walk every single night with our spouse. That seems a lot more practical and sustainable. I guarantee over the course of time, it's going to lead to a lot healthier approach in general. And so it's pulling away from some of these extreme measures, as attractive as they can be. And frankly, sometimes they can be what people need in extreme circumstances to like reframe and reset some different components. But the focus on long-term sustainability is ultimately what leads people to looking great naked without living in the gym and having that consistent lifestyle that they're looking for. And so that's such an important aspect. Now, Mike, one thing you had mentioned before is you spent a lot of time looking directly at studies. I would consider you evidence-based. I would consider myself evidence-based. However, it also sounds like, and if I'm projecting here, if I'm wrong, just let me have it. You started to notice that things that were coming up in studies aren't always relevant to when somebody's in front of me. Can you elaborate on that a little bit further?
Yeah. So I think that you mentioned it, like when we have a study that maybe was, 12 college males, and then we're looking at somebody who is in the real world in this dynamic, kind of complex system. It's really difficult to just copy paste what happened in a study again, we have to recognize like research drives what I would say is like research drives our approach as a starting point, and it can give us insight into things that might be successful, but nothing matters unless it stands the test of the real world dynamic and the individual. And individuals are complex. There's nuance, there's context, there's individuality, there's all of this stuff that comes into play. So even if we look at a study, we have to remember that we're seeing averages and there were outliers across the board. We also have to remember that certain times when it comes to nutrition, it may have been in a lab in a very controlled environment, and then we put them in a real world that's not a controlled environment. All of a sudden, the data is very skewed. So, I think a big one for me was just in like quantity is all that matters. Like there's all this research to show that calories in, calories out, it really doesn't matter where you're getting your food from. If you are, eating in a calorie deficit, that's what drives weight loss. And that is accurate. You can't, there's no loophole for energy balance. But what I found is that kind of misses the point on sustainability and adherence and compliance and enjoyability and what happens when Susie goes out with her girlfriends and it's, wine night, and what happens when, there's an emotional event or trauma or something that would trigger a binge episode or overindulgence or snacking. It doesn't remove the fact that, yes, we know from research, energy balance is real and it matters and you can't dance around it. But the way that I would approach it isn't just, listen, Susie, calories in, calories out. You just got to be better at hitting your macro. You just have to follow through on your macro plan. I'm going to approach it from a lifestyle. Let's talk about why when there's negative emotions present, you gravitate towards food. Let's talk about what's going on there. Let's talk about inserting maybe, a pattern interrupt where it's not the immediate thing that you do. And we take a pause and you take some deep breaths and you get out of the room and you go for a walk and then you come back and you make the decision that you want to make. And if that's still to crush the pint of ice cream, go for it, have at it. But maybe there's a more productive outlet there that you find to be more rewarding. Let's see so now we're talking about like actual behavior change. So I think research is great. Studies inform and they can drive direction, but it's not the end all be all. And I think we have to always remember, the variables of the study and who was the study on and was it in a lab? Was it in real world? Have we seen a repeated, like there's certain things where one study will show something and then we try to replicate the result and we can't. So it's, there's so many different variables that go into it, which is why I look at it from a very personalized one-on-one individual context. And I find that produces more success.
Yeah, it has to be factored into the individual level. And I think what you hit on here was also that a lot of times research studies cannot be duplicated. And when we can't replicate something, that can potentially be problematic as well, especially in the current environment where I see a lot of young individuals in the fitness industry doing this, where they build their entire business or their brand around highlighting this study, and then it's this study, and then it's this study without the practical application of somebody directly in front of them. And that just misses the boat with a lot of context. But the issue that it creates is people build influence. There's evidence, which I'm glad that there's evidence for something. I really am, that you're not just pulling shit out of your ass and like eating liver and chopping stuff up with knives for social media likes. But when we have that approach without understanding how things apply directly to the individual, it creates a lot of limitations. And when people get so stuck in where's the research, the real question should be, does this research apply?
Yeah. And I think it creates a lot of, kind of dogmatic philosophies around nutrition and training. You could go back and forth with somebody who's a low carb believer and says, look at this study that showed low carb was superior than a high carb diet. And then I can come back and say, yeah, but look at this study that showed the high carb group lost more fat than the low carb group. And then they'll poke holes in that study and say why it's invalid. I can poke holes in their study and show why. And you can play that game forever. And that's why it's like, let's look at the full body of evidence that we have at this moment. And then let's make a conclusion for the individual to the best of our ability. And let's let the results do, like, when it comes to, we started talking a little bit about, like reverse dieting and helping with metabolism and things like that. The question is, let's find out and see what happens. Are you magically going to start dropping weight because we increased your calories? I don't know, but you've been trying to eat 1,200 calories. That's not working. Let's try it and see what happens and let your body tell us, is this actually working? Rather than being like, well, the research says this, so we have to be married to this plan. I think that's what happens. A lot of people will attach, confirmation bias. they hold a belief, then they look for all the reasons to continue believing it. And oftentimes it's at the expense of an individual who then signs up for a program where they you mentioned putting everybody in the same box. So that I find that that's kind of the dark side of somebody who's so focused on research, but they're very selective in the research that they attach to. It creates this dogmatic approach, and then they try to put everybody into the same box.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is, you see the low carb versus the high carb people going, and then somebody slaps down the meta-analysis, which it doesn't really matter as long as you control calories and keep protein at a certain amount. And then they try to poke holes in that, right? It's just like this endless circular battle that you see specifically, low carb, high carb. That's probably the biggest one that comes to mind as of right now. Mike, you are such an inspiration, both in terms of the way that you present information and the way that you help people at a practical level, both with your podcast, just hitting 900K, which is absolutely fantastic. Where can we find out more about you? Where can we learn from you? And give us all those details.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So my goal for 2024, I'm just going to set the same goal to get 1 million downloads in the year for my podcast. So 2023, I hit 900,000 downloads, which is still pretty amazing that people would listen to me rant for 30 to 60 minutes 3 times a week. But that's the best place to listen to more of my nonsense on Mind Over Macros. It's on any podcast platform. If you're more on the kind of personal development mindset side of things, you'll love it. I've of course talked about nutrition, I talk about training, but I really am fascinated by human behavior and our own psychology and why we do the things that we do. So I always try to break that down of what's happening internally and mentally that makes us do things like self-sabotage. And, why do we have all of this desire for instant gratification? Why is it so hard to be patient and play the long game? So I'm always fascinated in the human behavior side of things. So there's a heavy dose of that in the show. Instagram, you can connect with me. It's at @coach_Mike_Millner. And those are probably the 2 best places.
Awesome. Make sure you check out Mike. His information is absolutely fantastic, both on the Mind Over Macros podcast and, of course, over on Instagram. Thank you so much. Talk to you next time.
Hey, it's Eric here again. Now, there are 3 ways that I can help you look great naked. Number 1, if you want to grab a free copy of the Look Great Naked protocol to help you lose body fat without counting calories, then go to bachperformance.com/free training. Number 2, if you're a busy guy looking to build muscle, then I recommend checking out our Minimalist Muscle Blitz, which has helped over 1,000 men build muscle without living in the gym. Just go to minimalistmuscleblitz.com. The link will also be available in the show notes. Or number 3, and last, if you want to work with me directly and get the best results possible, apply at bachperformance.com/coaching to look great naked without living in the gym. Until next time, my friend,